Welcome to 50 Years of Her Story, a podcast from the United States Coast Guard Academy Alumni Association. I am your host, Nicolle Bogden, class of 2012. This series celebrates the women who have shaped the Coast Guard Academy over the past 50 years. Through conversations, we'll explore the experiences, challenges, and milestones that have transformed the Academy since women first reported in 1976. It's only fitting that we begin with one of those pioneers. Today's guest is Captain Joanne McCaffrey, United States Coast Guard retired, class of 1980. As a member of the first class to include women at the Coast Guard Academy, Joanne helped shape what it meant to be among the first. During her Coast Guard career, she served aboard a cutter as a civil engineer and a senior leader, while also helping pave the way for future generations through initiatives that continue to impact Coast Guard families today. In this conversation, Joanne reflects on what it meant to arrive without a roadmap, the importance of asking the questions that matter, and how small acts of courage can create lasting change. Here's my conversation with Captain Joanne McCaffrey. Hi, Joanne. Welcome to 50 Years of Her Story. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Before we get started, I wanted to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself for the people who are listening who may not know you and a little bit about your background.
Okay. I'm Joanne McCaffrey. I'm a member of the Coast Guard Academy class of 1980, which was the first one to include women. I'm from Wheaton, Maryland, and I was in the Coast Guard for 27 years. I retired as a captain. Those 27 years don't include 2 years that I took off from my career, nor do they include my 4 years at the Academy. So in total, 31 were in Coast Guard Blue, and 33 from start to finish.
That is a lot of years, and
It
I'm
is.
so excited to start digging into the stories you have from all those years.
Yep.
But first, going way back to the beginning, what drew you to the Coast Guard Academy? How did you find out about it? Why did you decide to come to the Coast Guard Academy? Take us through that journey a little bit.
So I came of age, was a teenager in the 1970s. And during the 1970s, the Navy had a very persuasive recruiting campaign that said, join the Navy, see the world. And I was persuaded. And I told my mother one day in the car, one of those car chat moments, I think I'm going to join the Navy when I finish high school. And she said, you're not joining anything. You're going to college. And I didn't even really know that those things were not the same thing. But I said, oh, okay. And I began to focus on going to college. I was already a good student and a feisty little girl who played the flute and was athletic, though I didn't play sports because in my town in the 70s, the youth sports league was called the Wheaton Boys Club. And that's exactly who it was for, boys, not girls. And then as I was in high school, my mother, who read the newspaper every day, I'm confident she was a frustrated feminist because she had had me in the late 1950s, was reading the Washington Post. We lived in Maryland, and said, I think they're going to admit women to the Naval Academy the year you graduate from high school. And I thought, okay, that's what I'm going to do then. And so that's what I began to pursue at the tail end of my junior year and then leading into my senior year. I was making application to the Naval Academy. At that time, they still did not accept women at the Naval Academy. And I was reminded of that every time I submitted a piece of paper to the admissions office at Annapolis. But in the middle of that, the Coast Guard made a decision to admit women to the Coast Guard Academy and invited me to apply. And so I did. But I'll be honest, I was focused on Annapolis. My father had insisted that I read the entire catalog cover to cover, so I knew what I was getting into. And the Coast Guard Academy was almost an afterthought. But by June of 1976, of course, Annapolis had been forced by law to admit women, and I had an appointment in my hand to both the Coast Guard Academy and Annapolis. My Annapolis appointment arrived just a week before I would need to arrive at the Coast Guard Academy. And for some reason, it occurred to me to ask if I was going to be allowed to go on the training cruises, see the world. And when I asked the admissions officer at Annapolis if I would be going on the training cruises, they said, "Oh, no, but we'll come up with something for the girls." And when I asked the admissions office at the Coast Guard Academy that same question, the answer was, "Oh, of course, your training will be identical to the men's training at the Coast Guard Academy." So that's how I made my decision to go to the Coast Guard Academy and report there on June 28th, 1976.
So really just days before you had to
Yeah.
report to the academy, did you
Yeah.
decide that that's where you were going to go?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was, I was only 18. So I am constantly astonished that I thought to ask that question, but
Yeah.
for some reason I just decided to ask that question. It made all the difference in my entire life.
Outside of wanting an equal opportunity, what else did you know about the summer?
I I knew that the summer training program was going to be physically demanding. I was I was running in the weeks leading up to reporting in. I don't think I thought very much about the yelling part of it. I knew it would be physical, and I know that I was surprised the first time someone yelled at me, which was, we hadn't even gone to get our first uniforms issued or our haircut, and I got yelled at because I sat on a rack um, instead of on the chair in my room. And somebody said, "Get off the rack." And I was like, "What's a rack?" But so so I don't think I thought too much about that, but of course I adapted quite quickly, as we all do, and figured, okay, try to figure out what's going on here so I don't get yelled at anymore. But quite honestly, I never took the yelling, or almost never took the yelling seriously or personally, and I was just rolling with it. So I knew it would be physical. I knew, of course, we'd be in uniform, and I think that's all I really knew.
So we know that wanting the same experience was important to you.
Mm-hmm.
How did that actually shake out for you in your time at Swab Summer and then the rest of your time at the academy?
It shook out really as advertised. The women were completely integrated into the platoons that we were in during Swab Summer. There were, there was a woman's room, and then there was a men's room, and then there was a woman's room. So it wasn't, we weren't segregated or anything like that. We had our own bathrooms. I hadn't really thought about that. I think I assumed we would have our own bathrooms and showers, but we did. I always like to talk about the bathrooms, or heads as we called them, because there were two heads. One was for the toilets, and in our case, urinals. There were urinals in the bathroom because they hadn't renovated the bathrooms, and someone had put a tape X over each of the urinals, and of course they had changed the sign from men's head to women's head on the outside, and I thought, oh, that was nice of them. And also funny and kind of sweet that they had done that. And in the showers, which were gang showers, they had installed D-ring curtain rods around each of the shower heads in the gang shower and put shower curtains on them. And during Swab Summer, time is of the essence. So the first girl to make it to the showers, which was typically Jean Butler, because she was a really good runner, would fling all those curtains out of the way and turn on every single shower head, because despite what the planners thought about modesty and individual showers, the women were not looking at each other. We were just running through that shower to try to get some of the sweat that was all over us all day off. And again, I thought that was sweet that they put those shower curtains up. We don't want them though, and so we flung them out of the way.
Right. Yeah, it's going to slow us down. There is no
Yep.
time.
But we were doing everything. We were doing everything, same as the guys, reveille, morning calisthenics, getting yelled at, rushing to get to breakfast formation. We did everything the same. We had our own locker rooms, showers, and heads, but otherwise it was same old for everybody.
Yeah, that's great. And,
Mm-hmm.
good for them for integrating you just like
Yeah.
how they said they were going to. Otherwise, you
Yes.
would have showed up and you
Yes.
were like, that's not what you said on the phone 3
Yeah.
days ago
Yeah.
before I got here.
Yeah.
Um, what stands out when you think back to being part of the first class of women?
Um, I think what stands out, like uh, right from the first day that we arrived, and I didn't anticipate this, the interest from the press and others in us. And so starting right when we got there were cameras and people interviewing us when we were in line for everything from haircuts to getting our uniforms issued. And it never ended. It was for 4 years. And when we were aboard the Eagle, the same thing happened when we went to Europe. So we were always quite the curiosity. And I think that's what stands out the most about being the first. I'll also say that before we were arriving, I thought, these other girls are going to probably end up being my very best friends, because we're going to go through something amazing together. Um, and that's not what happened. We were really segregated from one another. I mean, in my case, there were 4 women in my platoon, and I didn't get to meet any of the other women during the summer, really. They might be in the locker room, but we were always rushing to get to whatever the next thing was. And then as the year wore on, we were discouraged, and some say outlawed, from even meeting with one another. So it was a rare event that you were with the women, and if you were with them, you certainly weren't getting to know them.
You mentioned being outlawed with congregating and speaking to each
Mm-hmm.
and having
Mm-hmm.
larger groups of
Mm-hmm.
women. What was the culture like after Swab Summer, which is a very unique experience, right? And then you enter your
Sure,
4
sure.
years
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to school and learning, and it becomes a bit more routine. What culture was there at the academy?
Well, I think Swab Summer was very intense, and I was in the last group of swabs during Swab Summer to go aboard the Eagle. So there's 3 cruises for the swabs. Mine was the last one, and what that meant was that when we got back from our 1 week aboard Eagle, the Corps of Cadets had returned. Once we got kind of settled and were in our room in India Company, we could look up at any given time, and my doorway would be filled with the faces of curious cadets. Who are these women we hear so much about? And I don't know if they were from my company, all the companies, if they came over from the 1st Regiment, but that we were still a curiosity, even to the other cadets. And honestly, I wanted to. I've always been kind of, I don't know, fun loving. I wanted to be a part of everything that was going on at the academy. And so I think I was probably kind of a big mouth, just always engaging in pranks and things like that. And always pretty outspoken. And although there was certainly no red carpet rolled out for us, I don't know when it occurred to me that there were a bunch of men at the Coast Guard Academy that wished I wasn't there. But at some point, I came to realize that there were people who resented our presence. And it really came to a head at the end of the first semester, because we had a system called the adaptability system, in which everybody in your company, in your class and all the classes above you, would evaluate you, your military adaptability or your potential to be an officer. And if they thought you were amazing in the top of the bell curve, they would write up why. And they had to. And if they thought you had no potential, didn't belong there, they also had to write you up as why. And at the end of that first semester, my third class squad leader called me into his room to go over my adaptability poll results with me. And there was a huge stack of paper that he handed to me, and it did not have good stuff to say. Literally everybody in my platoon, it seemed like, based on the stack of paper, had written me up, and certainly everyone in the class of 79 had written me up. As I read them, and I read every one and believed every one, my eyes started to weep, and this poor third class is watching this, young person crying over her adapts. And when I was done, I handed them back to him, and I headed back to my room, squaring my corners, bracing up, trying to be a good swab, and was thinking, I don't belong here. They don't want me here. And I was crushed. But I don't know if I even made it back to my room before it dawned on me, oh, they're hoping I'll leave. They're hoping to crush me. And I decided right then and there that that was not going to happen. And so I often say, and that's why I stayed for 30 whatever years. But the story, of course, goes on, because there were times when I was a cadet that I very seriously considered resigning because of things that were done to me by upper and underclassmen, and they were painful because it was clear that I wasn't really wanted by some, not by all, but by some for sure. And so I guess that I hope that answers the what was it like in Chase Hall. And I should also add that because there were no women in the 1st Regiment, there was a decision made high up that they wanted to integrate the Corps of Cadets completely as soon as possible. At Christmas time, right after I read those adapts and cried my way through them, they called the women together and said, we're going to put women into the 1st Regiment when you return from the Christmas holiday. Is there anyone who would like to volunteer to move to the 1st Regiment? And I stuck my fist out immediately, because I thought, I can't do any worse in the 1st Regiment than I have just done in India Company for my first semester. And I think my arm might have been one of 2 that was out. And when we came back, I was assigned to Charlie Company. And now there were women in all the annexes and all the companies, starting with the 2nd semester of our 4th class year.
Wow. More change, more turmoil after that feeling of not belonging. That's a hard feeling to get over whenever you experience it, right? Of not fitting in and knowing people don't want you there. On top of rigorous academics and
Yeah,
being away from home and missing
shining your
friends and
shoes.
family. Yeah, man.
I,
Oh, that's so
I
tough.
have to tell you too, there were some of the women, maybe it'd be fair to say most of the women, had grown comfortable in their companies. And I think many of them were selected to move because they were succeeding, because they thought, okay, these women are, they have strong adapts or strong grades, or in many cases, both. In the case of my roommate, she had both. I don't blame those adapts just on my gender, because there were women who came out of that first semester shining. So it wasn't like all the women suffered the way I did, but and those women who were comfortable in the 2nd Regiment found themselves upended when they were dropped into a new company in the 1st Regiment. And that was very difficult. For me, it was a fresh start. For others, it was being yanked from where they had grown comfortable.
That's a lot going on. A part of my academy experience was always leaning on others and finding
Mm-hmm.
those people to support
Mm-hmm.
and help during those tough times. You've told a story a few times about falling in love with another cadet at the academy, and I'm wondering if you could tell us about that a little bit and maybe share how some of that support
Absolutely.
helped you through.
Happy to do that. When during on the very first day of swab summer, you get just loads of uniforms issued to you. You get your hair cut, and then they said you need to hem your dungarees in time for the swearing in ceremony, which was around 4 p.m. or something. And we had been issued a sewing kit. And so my roommate, Sue Vincenti, and I got to work like hemming our pants so we would be ready for the swearing in ceremony. I'm told other people's figured out ways to tape up their pants, staple their pants, all kinds of things. And but a number of our classmates came in and asked us if we would hem their pants. And we said, no, we're hemming our own pants right now. We're not going to do that. And one of the cadets came in and asked if we would show him how to hem his pants. And it was the swab next door. And so of course we said yes. And we did show him how to hem his pants. And that same swab, I guess kind of frequently ended up, if we went to a lecture or something like that, I would find myself sitting next to him. And then at one point we were up at the enrollment hall for doing our physical fitness test. And another classmate from my platoon said, hey, you're from Maryland, right? And I said, yes, I am. And he said, my roommate's from Maryland. Here, let me introduce you. And the same guy, swab next door. I was from Montgomery County, Maryland. And like I said, I was a pretty excited nerd. And I said, hey, hi, I'm from Maryland. I hear you're from Maryland. I'm from Wheaton. Where are you from? And he says, Bowie. And that's all he said. And I thought, what a jerk. And I'll be honest, I don't know that I was putting together who this guy was, like that he was the swab next door, that he was the guy who asked about the pants. But at some point it started to sink in. Oh, that's the same guy who, with the pants and Bowie and all of that. And, at some point, I had a brilliant idea about formal room inspections that if we did our laundry in the middle of the night, there would be like washers available and dryers available, because that was always a chore trying to find a washer to get your laundry done before formal room, because even though you'd had a very sweaty week, you weren't supposed to have a bag full of laundry on Saturday morning. So we did come up with a scheme, and he said, yeah, let's do that. I'll do my roommate's laundry and you can do you and your roommate's laundry. So that was the plan. We're going to sneak out and do our laundry in the middle of the night. And so the first Friday that we were going to do this, like it was the pointed hour, 2 a.m. or something crazy. I come out with my 2 bags of laundry, and I got shins, I'm squaring corners. And he says, what are you doing? And I said, what are you doing? And he said, it's the middle of the night. If we get caught out here, we're in big trouble. It's not going to matter that you're squaring corners. And I think he said, you get in too much trouble anyway, because that was true. I had already been on correction platoon. I was, I could be a real screw up, and which could account for the adapts as well. I don't know, but so he went and did all the laundry, and I don't know. I think probably sometime around there, the deal was sealed. I was head over heels for this guy. Yeah, and we broke up a few times while we were cadets, but we got married the day after graduation, and headed off into our careers. We had children, and we just celebrated 46 years in May. So yeah,
That's
the swab
amazing.
next door. Yeah.
Aw, I love that.
That's the
From
guy.
Bowie.
Yeah, from Bowie.
Yep. I feel like we could talk all day about your academy stories, but I do want to get a little bit into your career and what you did post-academy. Can you take us through how you want us to know what that career path was like a little bit until grad school and moving into that engineering field?
Sure. I mean, I went to a ship. At that time, all graduates went to sea. It was understood. However, you should know that until sometime in our 3rd class year, women were not assigned to cutters in the Coast Guard. So we went through our entire 4th class year, I think. I'm really not sure of the exact timing, but at, knowing and hoping that we would that rule would change and that we would be assigned to cutters upon graduation. And so the rule was changed and and I was in the middle of my class. At that time, we picked our billets based on class rank, and I ended up going to be a deck watch officer aboard a 378 off of Governor's Island, New York, which was just south of Manhattan. And my husband selected a very old cutter called the Tamaroa, which was on the next pier over in Governor's Island, New York. And that tour was, I think, everything I hoped it would be. Again, a lot of surprises. There were actually women aboard the Cutter Gallatin among the crew. I was the only officer, a woman officer aboard Gallatin when I reported aboard. Later, an OCS officer joined me, but we did mostly migrant and narcotics interdiction patrols in the Caribbean, but we also did a extended NATO exercise across the Atlantic and up over the Arctic Circle and went to Europe. And it was just great. It was what I had hoped it would be. I was the navigator and the communications officer and actually used what they taught us in NOTSI and went to comms officer school. And it was really wonderful. Coming off of that, I had high hopes that maybe I'd be selected to command a patrol boat. That was kind of the brass ring job for a Lieutenant JG. I was not selected for command afloat, but I was asked to become an admissions officer at the Coast Guard Academy, and the director of missions was Captain Robert Getman. And I came back to the academy in 1982, just 2 years later, and it was wonderful to get to talk to applicants and their families. I just love to, brag about my school. And it was wonderful also to get to interact with the cadets, which all junior officers are kind of expected when they serve at the academy to participate in cadet life. And so I did get to lecture. And the women cadets, found me. They beat a pretty steady path to my door to ask about things, particularly because during that tour, I decided to start my family. So I was a pregnant Lieutenant JG walking around the Coast Guard Academy, which was not a sight that had never been seen. We had a company officer when I was a cadet who was pregnant, but for the cadets that were there when I was a junior officer, I was that person for them to see and say, oh my gosh, she's married, she's having a baby, she's wearing a blue uniform. That's a possibility. And often they would come and talk to me about that, or about their problems, or about if they were thinking about resigning, or just anything at all. So it was a wonderful, wonderful tour as an admissions officer at the Coast Guard Academy. And while I was an admissions officer, I decided that I would apply for the graduate training program in ocean engineering, which was my major at the academy. And I was selected. And then I applied to the University of Rhode Island and I was accepted. And so from my job in admissions, I went to the University of Rhode Island. And by the time I went there, I had had 2 babies. So I arrived at grad school as the mother of a toddler and a baby. And I looked very different than the other students there, many of whom had come straight from their undergrads. And I was able to complete my master's in the 2 years that are allotted and was able to take all the time off that college students get to take off. And during my second year there, I decided to have another baby. So I spent my final year in grad school expecting, defended my thesis on a Friday when I was 9 months pregnant, and then delivered a baby girl 5 days later, and called it a day on grad school. And then my family and I moved to Cleveland, where I had my first engineering tour as a lieutenant at the civil engineering unit in Cleveland, which was again, it was amazing. It was aids to navigation, which is exactly what ocean engineers do. So it was offshore structures, existing and new, modern and old, lighthouses, buoys, and the Great Lakes and the Mid-Atlantic is what CEU Cleveland takes care of. So just every kind of challenge of a structure on or in the water that an ocean engineer could hope for. And I got to travel and work with professional design firms to build huge structures in the Chesapeake Bay. And I was a working mom with 3 children at a time when there was really no such thing as a daycare center. Certainly not one in the federal building like there is today. There were not daycare centers that you would drive by and maybe go sign your child up for daycare. And so I had to figure all that out. And that was difficult, really difficult. But we did pull that piece of being a working mom off really just with grit, because there were no resources. I had to kind of invent them, which I did. And I'm happy to say that I and the other women in the Coast Guard and the world basically have kind of fixed that problem. But in the 80s, in my little hometown in Cleveland, outside of Cleveland, there were no mommies that went to work. So that was hard. But the job part, it was amazing.
Right. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
man, I'm just reflecting a little bit on kind of your experience and your journey. And weirdly, my husband and I have sort of paralleled in that we met at the academy as well. He ended up at the University of Rhode Island for his engineering degree.
Oh, wow.
So which is pretty funny. But I, like you were saying, had a lot of mentors that I was able to talk to about colo or dual member to member marriage. And we also had our first child while he was at grad school. So in that time frame of being a lieutenant,
Yep.
and to think about you going through that experience of grad school, which is hard in and of itself.
Sure.
But
yep.
2 children, then a third. Your husband's also working. And I think a majority of your classmates and peers probably were just focused on grad school, not having to manage however many other hundreds of things you were managing, which is just incredible, of that multitasking kind of layer and just always getting everything done because you don't really have another option.
Right. And I shouldn't, I don't want to gloss over how hard it was to have 3 children, being at CEU Cleveland, and trying to balance that. During my tour at CEU Cleveland, my heart started to hurt because my oldest was in preschool, and then my middle one, my little boy, he headed off to preschool, and I had a lovely in my home caregiver who was taking care of my kids. So I was not ever worried about their safety or anything like that, or well-being, but my well-being was starting to suffer because they climbed on a little school bus and went to school, and then they climbed off of their school bus with their art projects, and she greeted them, and they had their afternoon snack, and they got on to their afternoon of being little kids, playing in the backyard or with friends. And I was downtown. I didn't see any of that. My youngest was a baby, so she was, learning how to walk and all those things while I was downtown. I honestly didn't mind the baby stuff because they do that over and over again throughout the day. But the climbing on and off of the school bus part was what was kind of killing me. And so right in the middle of my CEU Cleveland tour, I wrote a letter and asked to resign or to leave the Coast Guard for a bit because I felt like I was just really missing out on the preschool years. And I also felt like I was on a roller coaster that it never rolled up to the point where you got off. It just kept going and going. It was exhausting. I was exhausted. And my boss endorsed the letter. He thought it was a fine idea. In my letter, I promised to return to the Coast Guard, and it went up to my admiral at the Maintenance and Logistics Command. And I think there was a lot of agonizing over it because who wants to say no to a young mom who wants some time with their children? But he did say no. And the letter back said that that they could not release me from my graduate school obligated service. So my captain told me, or my commander told me, that this was the case, and I was, really sad. And he goes, but they said that we can do whatever we need to help you out. So we want you to come up with what would it take for you to feel more comfortable in your role as a mother of young children, because you could like just work from home, and which was unheard of in 1990. And so I gave it some thought, and I carried, I call it mom guilt and lieutenant guilt. I had, there were a bunch of lieutenants in my office. They all were working hard. And then there was a bunch of moms in my neighborhood, and they were all staying home, every one of them. And so I thought, if I could just have one day per week when I work from home, I think that might do it. Can we just start with that? And so they said, of course. And this is pre-computers. So there were no laptops. There weren't even desktops at that time. Your inbox was literally a wooden box with paper on it. And so on Thursday, I would take my inbox home with me, and I would get my children off to school. I would volunteer in the classroom. I would meet the bus when it got home. And during the baby's nap time, I would do my inbox. So I was like the first telecommuter. And it was enough. It was enough for me just to have that one day. And then as I rolled up on the end of my graduate school obligation and my time at CEU Cleveland, I got a call from Joanna Noonan, who was a lieutenant, JG, I think, at the time. And she said, guess what? Your letter where you asked to leave the Coast Guard and return is with the Women's Study Group, and we are publishing a policy that will allow anyone to, or maybe it was just any woman, but anyone to leave the service for 2 years, once in a career, to care for their children. And so when my obligated with service was up, I put in a letter and I asked to take that program. I wanted 2 years off to be a full-time stay-at-home mom and then return to the Coast Guard. And the only glitch was I didn't have a newborn child, but eventually they waived that, and I got to take 2 years off coming out of CEU Cleveland, and it was a stay-at-home mom for 2 years when we moved to Virginia Beach for my husband's assignment. And then after 2 years, I returned to active duty at the Facilities Design and Construction Center. And at that point, I was a lieutenant commander. I had left as a lieutenant commander with 12 years in, and I returned as a lieutenant commander with 12 years in, and then continued and completed my career after that.
What happened to you, it sounds like, is what I feel like we now call the temporary separation program, which is
Yes.
something that is still alive and well today, and it's been expounded upon. And I can say anyone can take. You don't have to be a mom. You don't have to have a newborn.
Right.
To be a reason, and they've kind of
Right.
expanded that. And I also took advantage of the temporary separation program after I had my son. So I was too a stay-at-home mom for two littles for a little bit. So I thank you and Joanna
You're
and the
welcome.
Women's Retention and Study Group, because it's a wonderful program that helped me through some difficult times of also feeling that mom guilt, or whatever you want to call it, of
Absolutely.
our nanny watched our baby take her first steps, and do a game, this puzzle game that we work on. And I was like, oh, I'm missing these firsts, but I'm also loving my job. I loved the Coast Guard and what I was doing. And it gave me the opportunity to have a little bit of both worlds. And I'll be forever grateful. But I will say, during my time as a stay-at-home mom, which is literally the hardest job I've ever had in my entire life out of all my
Coast Guard yes. Jobs. And the pay is terrible.
It's so bad. I've learned through being a stay-at-home mom that I am not a stay-at-home mom, and I missed working, and I missed kind of that day-to-day interacting with other adults and solving problems that weren't my family problems. And so while I enjoyed those years at home, I was very excited to go back
Yep.
and work in the Coast Guard again.
I could not wait to put my
Yeah,
uniform back on.
yeah, yeah, literally the hardest job I've ever had. Um,
Absolutely.
but thank you to
You're
the
welcome.
trailblazers for that,
Yeah.
and just that letter really that kind of started it all. And while they said no
Yep.
at first, eventually they got to yes, and
Uh-huh.
now hundreds, I'm assuming, of women have taken advantage of that
Yep.
opportunity.
And men.
And
It's
men,
really
you're
been
right. Yeah,
amazing. It's been
yeah.
amazing.
Thank you to our alumni community for your continued engagement. You are what keep this community strong and thriving, especially our members. Membership in your alumni association matters. It empowers connections between our alumni and the Academy to develop thriving and enduring relationships. It supports state-of-the-art and margin of excellence enhancements for the Corps of Cadets. And membership also comes with some pretty cool benefits, like access to professional development and certifications, unique connection opportunities to grow your network, discounts and savings when welcoming back the whole family for homecoming, and so much more. Your membership even supports projects like this podcast. So stay connected, stay up to date, and ensure that your ties to the Long Blue Line remain strong. Become a member today at cgaalumni.org/1887.
We have talked a little bit about your career and the TEMSET program, but
Mm-hmm.
are there stories that you wanted to share that show some of the, I don't want to say difficulties, because your attitude and your character, I feel like you're not one to take some of the difficulties and have those be barriers to you. Maybe they were more challenges. How did you get through some of those challenges of being the only female officer on a cutter to work in
Mm-hmm.
an engineering field that is,
Mm-hmm.
dominated by men? What got you through some of those?
Um, I think sometimes naivete got me
Yeah.
through. Just as when I was a brand new cadet, it did not occur to me that people didn't want me there. It dawned on me at some point. And then I had to decide how to handle or manage that. But I aboard ship, I had a, kind of a performance review with my boss one time, and he said you handled a difficult leadership challenge very well with your chief. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And he said, your chief cannot stand working for a woman. And I went, oh, I thought he just didn't care for me. Not my gender so much as just me. And I thought, I'm actually kind of glad that didn't occur to me. And so of course from then on, each time one of these things happens, then you kind of file that away and you realize it is possible that I'm encountering people that don't care for the fact that I'm a woman in their workspace where there didn't used to be one. And sure enough, at CU Cleveland, there was a guy who could kind of reduce me to tears with how mean he was sometimes. But again, he had a physical disability. It was a debilitating, I think he had MS. And I just kind of attributed that to the fact that his life was hard. And so maybe he was grumpy to people because of that. And I still don't know. I didn't interview him. There were a lot of condescending people. I tended to let that roll off my back, maybe complain about it privately to my husband at home or something. And we would joke about it. And then I was privileged to manage the largest ever offshore design and construction program that the Coast Guard had executed up until that time and perhaps ever since. And it was the Rappahannock Range program, which is a series of navigational ranges that were built in the Rappahannock in the Chesapeake Bay. And then we needed to put the project out to bid to marine construction firms. And we selected a great design firm. And the principal was a retired Navy civil engineer. And he wanted to make a concrete table in the Chesapeake Bay instead of a concrete island. And so it was going to be my job to evaluate this. And I was a lieutenant. I was in my 30s and he was a retired captain. So I had to call him and tell him and write a letter that said we were not accepting their value engineering proposal. And he said to me, "Did your fancy AE tell you that?" And I thought, I just got this sense that because of my age, certainly, and experience, which is very fair, but there was something about the way he said it, just the flavor of it, that I think that was maybe the first time I thought, I wonder if gender's part of this. But it didn't matter. I was representing the Coast Guard, and I said, of course he did. We pay him good money to be our consultant, and we're not accepting your value engineering proposal, so please build us an island in the Chesapeake Bay. That's what we're paying you for. And after that, I think I was senior enough in my positions that if somebody didn't care for the fact that I was a senior woman, that's really their problem. And I didn't think very much about it after that.
Well, that's good. That's some good advice. You have said before that you've played a key role in the response for Hurricane Katrina and Rita as far as securing funding and developing a plan. I do want to talk briefly about that because, again, in this theme of trailblazing, right, I feel like you have done so many things to start something. And while this is really just beneficial for the Coast Guard and not necessarily women at the Academy or women in the Coast Guard, I do want to talk a little bit about this because this is kind of huge. And as somebody married to a civil engineer and dealing with these kind of finances, I like it and I think it's kind of exciting. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Of course. I think this may be the thing I'm most proud of from my career. And so I was fortunate enough to be the CO of the Facilities Design and Construction Center when Hurricane Katrina hit the Gulf Coast. And it took out Station Gulfport completely. Station Gulfport, only the steel frame remained when it was over. And then, of course, because of the break in the levees, we lost the industrial base in the 9th Ward of New Orleans. So we had lost 2 major facilities, and then we saw the opportunity to consolidate the functions of the sector into one facility. And I had been a civil engineer or in the civil engineering program long enough, because I was a captain, to know that we never got the right amount of funding to do new construction. And I also knew that after Katrina, Congress was going to be more than willing to help us rebuild. So I had my team at the Facilities Design and Construction Center come up with a number for each of the facilities that we were being tasked with coming up with a budget for. And then they did what they always did, which was came up with a very modest number. And I just wasn't having it. My joke was that I multiplied that number by pi because I felt like we were going to need a lot more money than what my team was saying we needed. And I submitted a larger number than we'd ever asked for to Coast Guard headquarters, to the civil engineering program. And I received a call from an officer on that staff up there that built budgets and was going to submit to Congress our request. And he told me he thought the number was ridiculous. And I told him that was my number. I was sticking by it. So they reduced my number by some percentage and submitted it to Congress. And Congress gave us exactly what we asked for. The only person who questioned the number and decreased it was the civil engineering officer at headquarters. And we got the money and we awarded contracts and we built beautiful hurricane resistant structures and a levee gate to protect the base. And I got to involve the cadets, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful series of projects that were properly funded from the start. And next was Sandy. And so every time that this happens, what we have taken away from that is to really ask for what you need. Don't be meek. Yeah. When I was talking to my peer at headquarters, I said, pretend like you're in the Air Force today and ask for the money you need to have a facility you can be proud of. And that's what we do.
I say the theme is, for you at least, Joanne, is asking those questions, right? From the very start of, will my experience be the same as the boys once I get to the academy, to I want this much money, and then getting it. It's all about just asking for what you want.
Ask. They
Yeah.
can say no, but you have to
Right.
ask. Mm-hmm.
Right. You might as well. We've gone through a lot of your career. I think there's always a time to decide that transition is coming, what that looks like and when is the right time and what's
Mm-hmm.
next. It sounds like you loved almost every job you had in the Coast Guard. What was that transition like for you, going from a career coastie to your next adventure?
I think, especially having spoken with, many, many other officers, I think the decision to retire as a captain, I mean, first you make the decision to go for it, go beyond 20. And when I say go for it, I don't mean like to go for flag or anything. I
Mhm.
never, that was never an aspiration of mine to be an admiral. I don't know if I thought stay till 30. I don't know that I had an absolute, deadline for my career. But coming out of the job as chief of civil engineering for the Atlantic area, I um, had hoped, had wanted to be the commanding officer of the new Shore Infrastructure Logistics Center. It was an '06 billet. Of course, there were several of us vying for it, and I was not selected to be the commanding officer, and instead was offered an opportunity to do major acquisitions at Coast Guard headquarters, and and I just didn't want to do that. I didn't want to move to DC. I didn't want to do any kind of geographic bachelor thing just to make it to 30. And so I made my decision at that point to retire at 27 years. And it was painful. And I think that's the case for a lot of captains because you don't necessarily know that you're not going to get continued in some cases, or you're not going to get the job that you hope to get for your twilight tour, or you realize the next job they're offering you is not as good as the one you're leaving, in your opinion. And so you go, okay, I guess I'm done. So you don't necessarily see it even coming. I mean, you don't. You always think there's going to be another billet, and there's not. Or that you're not going to be the one that makes the decision, that you'll hit 30 and it'll be time to go. So it was sad. I mean, I was bummed I didn't get that job. And, but then you dust yourself off and you figure out what your next act is. And for me, that was to go into the corporate world. And so, I dusted myself off, took some time off, and was hired by a worldwide design build engineering firm called CDM Smith. And they were chasing a big Coast Guard contract, and they wanted help from me and one other retired Coast Guard officer to help them win it. And they did. They won it. And they got to build Station New London, and I got to be the project manager. I'm
Wow.
sorry, not New London, Cape May. And then they won one of the Rita projects, which is ironic. And I got to be the project manager on the corporate side, the profit side, for
Mhm.
Station Houston in Texas. And as that project was going on, my parents were aging, and I lost my mother, and then my dad needed help. And so I slowly dialed back as we completed Station Houston. I slowly dialed back my 10 years that I spent with CDM Smith and fully retired to provide with my sister the care that my father needed. So I wouldn't have done any of it any differently in retrospect,
I think that's a test to how you've
Mm-hmm.
done things, right? It's to look back and be like, actually, I wouldn't have changed anything. I like how
Yeah,
it all shook out
yeah,
in the
yeah.
end. And
There were
that's
disappointments, but
right.
then you make lemonade out of your lemons.
Exactly. And you grow
Mm-hmm.
from that. I am still in the process of transitioning as I separated from the Coast Guard about a year
Mm-hmm.
ago. And it's hard when you've spent a lot of your life being one thing and then
Mm-hmm.
moving on to something else and maybe not like, I'm like, well, I'm not a coastie anymore, but I kind of am always a coastie, but I'm also this new thing now and
Mm-hmm.
figuring out what that looks like.
Right.
Yes, similarly, I'm also working in the private sector for a Coast Guard contract, so I still am part of it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's in a different way. And
Yeah,
that transition is hard.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think being in the Coast Guard is transitioning from the Coast Guard is harder than a lot of things because you don't work for the Coast Guard.
Hmm.
You you are a Coast Guard officer. I don't work for the Coast Guard. I am a Coast Guard officer. So it's who you are. So to not be it one day, is a little bit more difficult than saying, yeah, I used to work for CDM Smith.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What else is something that you were most proud of from entering the academy in 1976 to
Mm-hmm.
now, really? Um,
Well, this seems like an appropriate moment to say, obviously, I'm very proud of my children. They are very successful adults. I have a daughter who is a nurse practitioner. I have a son who's a mechanical engineer, and I have a daughter who's a CEO in Stanford MBA. So that's what I'm most proud of, and of course, my long and wonderful marriage. And I think this is also probably a time to talk about my last most quirky project, and that is that one of my classmates said, "Hey, what are we going to wear at our 50th reunion, which is coming up in a few years?" She likes to think ahead, I guess. And I said, "I have for a long time thought it would be neat if we had a silk scarf commemorating our, Coast Guardness." And she said, "Well, you should do it." And so I started to look into it, and it turned out it was kind of a big project. And so rather than give it up, I decided to find a way to do a big project. And I, with hundreds and hundreds of Service Academy women, designed a scarf to commemorate 50 years of Service Academy women. And I found a company to produce it, and I marketed it, and from the start promised to donate all profits back to women's programs at the Coast Guard, at the service academies, all of them. In the process, I've made friends with women from all the different service academies, and we've so far donated $60,000 back to women's programs, and there are 8,000 Service Academy women's scarves out there around the necks of
I
Service
have a
Academy
few.
women and people who love Service Academy women.
They
Let's
come
see
in
it.
these beautiful boxes. I have one in every size because I couldn't decide.
There's our Coast Guard woman. She's based on me. You can tell because her high heels are too high, because that was my thing when I was a cadet, always pushing the envelope.
I love it.
There's the woman's bucket cap. And because I was in charge, we put the eagle right down at the tip there. So
It's beautiful. But you're being a little modest in
mhm.
the scope, I think, of this project, because not
Yeah,
only is it scarves for the Coast Guard Academy, there are unique scarves for each service academy. So
that is
unique
true.
designs for every service academy.
Hmm.
And then to top it all off, there are ornaments and yard flags and all of this other, swag, if you will,
Yes.
specifically with these designs that are beautiful.
Hmm.
The class of 2025, all the women at the Coast Guard Academy at least graduated and received a scarf upon
They did.
graduation.
Yeah. Yep.
So not only are we donating, the people supporting this project donating
Hmm.
money back to the academies, but other female graduates are also receiving scarves as gifts
They
funded
are. They are.
by the donations through this
Yep.
project. It
Yep.
is an amazing project. I love what it's become. I've been following it since the beginning. I think I saw over a year ago, 2 years ago now, a Facebook post of, we have this idea and
What would you think?
what should we do? What should we put on it? And I'm over there typing and, pledging how many scarves I'm buying, and now looking at the website, which I'll link in the description of this episode, all the other things, and it's just been so incredible and amazing. And this memento that I've seen them out in the wild too,
Oh, yeah.
going to events, and I'm like, oh my gosh, a scarf. And I'll walk up to that person, and say something, which is
You
just
must be
so
a Service
fun.
Academy woman.
Yes,
It's
yes,
amazing.
exactly.
It's amazing.
It's
It's
so
just
great.
it's been incredible.
Yeah.
It's been incredible. And I mean, honestly, every single thing that I've told you has been more than I ever imagined. I just could not be more grateful for the whole experience, to include this crazy scarf thing.
Aw.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So many things to be proud of. Your children, your family,
Mm-hmm.
all of the work you did in the Coast Guard to leave it better for the women following than it was while you were there. And any last words to maybe some of those female cadets at the Academy today that might be experiencing some challenges that seem too overwhelming? What would you say to them now, looking back of everything you've experienced? How would you tell somebody at the Academy now who might be struggling a little bit that it gets better and it will be worth it?
Well, I guess I would say it gets better and it will be worth it. But if it doesn't, obviously don't make any snap decisions.
Mhm.
I thought about leaving when I read that stack of adapts. There was a point in time when I would go to an away basketball game and I would come back and my room, I did not have a roommate at that time, was trashed. People had poured honey in my rifle. They did terrible things and they almost broke me. And it was the end of my third class year. Attrition was very high for men and women back in the 70s. And I thought, maybe I should go. Why am I putting up with this? I did well in high school. Why am I, suffering? But then I think again, it was like, they want me to leave. I'm not going to leave. And I'm really glad I didn't. It's a very interesting and rewarding career. And I think that's why it's worth staying. It's, I wasn't even, other than my first tour, I wasn't even a typical Coast Guard officer. I was in the engineering program and I loved it. I loved providing facilities for the operational Coast Guard. I just really did have a good time. And my advice to cadets, and I get to talk to them a lot, actually. I get invited back and I always tell them, it's your Coast Guard. If there's something that needs to be fixed, you should fix it. And when it ceases to be fun, when you hit that place where you're like, I don't think I want to do this or do that next thing that they want me to do, that's when it's time to go. But not when someone's like trying to make you go or make you feel bad. That's the time to kind of push back and go, no, I came here with a goal in mind and I'm going to continue to pursue that until I'm no longer having any fun and I don't want to do the thing that's over the horizon.
Thank you, Joanne. It's been
You're
incredible
welcome.
speaking with you today.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much for
Mm-hmm.
taking the time and joining us here at 50 Years
Mm-hmm.
of Her Story, and hopefully we get to chat again soon.
Oh, I would love that. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Before we wrap up, we'd like to take a moment to recognize someone who helped make another person's journey possible. As part of 50 Years of Her Story, we're inviting alumni to share a moment of gratitude, a chance to thank the classmates, mentors, instructors, coaches, family members, and friends whose support made a lasting difference. Here's this episode's moment of gratitude.
Hello, my name is Beth Young. I'm a class of 89, and I'm here today to give a shout out to Linda Johansson, one of the firsts. Linda was the picture of women at the Coast Guard Academy that I saw and any other woman who entered the academy in the mid-'80s saw. Her picture was on every promotional advertisement that came from the admissions office, and on anywhere there was a poster that showed a woman, it was virtually guaranteed there was at least one picture of Linda there with her sword held tight and taut and yelling pass and review, or one of many other pictures that they caught her in action doing. Linda was a woman in action. And like I said, when I went to the academy, that was the first role model we had were those photographs. And then fast forward a year or so, maybe I'm not sure when she showed up. Actually, I think she was there that summer. Swab summer, I believe she was already there as a company officer. We were lucky enough to have her on the staff and again, see her leadership in action. And there were a few women officers at the time, but we were lucky enough to have her and living the leadership role that I know she didn't have the opportunity to have around her when she was arriving at the academy. But she was heard, she was seen, she acted with precision, and she was kind, and she was welcoming and had a smile. She was fair, and she was a great leader. Those are all things that I observed as a cadet. I was also very happy as a member of the women's basketball team. We had about maybe 10 people that would come and watch our games, and Linda was a proud supporter of the basketball team, which I later found out was one of the reasons she was because she, in fact, played on the team in her academy time at the height of 5'3". She said she never played basketball before in her life, but Linda went in and she said she played every game, and she fouled out of every game. That was her job, was to be tough in there. And so I just wanted to show her appreciation for everything she did in the many leadership roles that she didn't even know she was taking on. So thank you, Linda. Appreciate that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of 50 Years of Her Story. As we reflect on 50 years of women at the Coast Guard Academy, stories like Joanne's remind us that many of the opportunities we have today exist because others had the courage to challenge the status quo and the determination to make things better for those who followed. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and share it with someone who would appreciate these stories. I'm Nicolle Bogden. Thank you for listening.